Well, hey everybody, in today's video we're going to cover two topics. One is going to be my final thoughts about the Campark V40, and the other topic is going to be about action cameras and these budget action cameras and some information that you may not realize when it comes to why are some of these action cameras so alike and how are they identical to each other but from different companies. That's coming right up. But before I get into my final thoughts about the Campark V40, I had a viewer that asked me if I could compare the Campark V40 against the DJI Osmo Action. So let's take a look at that clip right now and then we'll get to my final thoughts. So I've had the Campark V40 for a while now. It's identical to the Osmo Brave 7 LE. There are some things about this camera that I like, and there's some things about this camera that I don't like. And I guess we'll get right into the first thing is the low light footage that you saw in my previous video. It was night and day difference between those two cameras. The Osmo Brave 7 LE was not great quality in low light, but it was much brighter than what the Campark V40 was. Now the Campark V40, it was just, and I think it's the fact that even in their description about the Campark V40, it says it has auto low light, although it's not in the menu system. And it just doesn't seem to work very well. Now, I get so many people that ask me about these action cameras and can you do a low light test? Oh, this one sucks in low light. That one, these action cameras, they're built around being able to be outside in bright light and getting that action shot, whether you're skiing or whether you're doing water sports or you're on a bicycle, etc., etc. The sensor is way too small, and I know there's going to be a lot of people that say, well, you know, aperture has a big thing to do with it. Shutter speed has a big thing to do with it. True and true. But even if you were to put like a 1.2 aperture lens on an action camera, and you have to keep in mind that the sensor, its ISO sensitivity has a dramatic impact on its low light capabilities. But enough of that. I want to talk about the Campark V40 and my final thoughts about this camera. Now it's on sale right now for $129. So considering that it is native 4K, it has 6-axis gyroscopic stabilization, it has a touchscreen, it has dual screens, so you have that forward-facing screen right there that you can actually frame up your shot. That's a nice little vlogging setup. It's got a nice 1/4 on the bottom, so that's helpful if you want to use it with a tripod. But I think when you compare it to the Osmo Brave 7 LE, there are some plus and minuses between both of these cameras. So I think the electronic image stabilization on the Campark is smoother than the Osmo when it comes to nice, easy movements. So when you're walking nice and smoothly, it actually outperforms the Osmo. But with saying that, the Osmo Brave 7 LE, when you're doing quick movements, it's not as jerky. The Campark, it will jerk from movement to movement because the EIS, the processing power in these action cameras, these budget action cameras, should I say, is just not up to par to be able to keep up with nice, smooth GoPro Hero 8 or Osmo Action type of smooth image stabilization. Let's talk about the pros and cons of this Campark V40. I'll start off with the pros. It's got native 4K. It's got a responsive touchscreen on it. The menu system is pretty well laid out. It's got very good audio coming out of the in-camera microphone, and it actually records the left and right stereo audio signals, so that's very nice. It has very good build quality. It is water resistant to a couple of meters without the case, and then if you want to go into a swimming pool, then you need your waterproof case. Now let's get into some of the cons. The battery life was a shocker for me because the Akaso Brave 7 LE, out of both batteries, so it's not like one battery for some reason is better than the other on the Akaso, but both batteries have gotten me over 2 hours of videoing on a single battery. For some reason, a Campark V40, I can barely get an hour of 4K recording out of it. So that's something to keep in mind. And for me, I'm really kind of curious on, it has the same chipset, has the same sensor in it, although the lens is a little bit different. So it's got to be something about the firmware that is very power hungry to where it eats up the battery life, because both cameras being set identical in the menu system, the Campark, like I said, barely an hour and a solid 2 hours out of the Akaso. Another thing that is a con for me on the Campark versus the Akaso Brave 7 LE is that it has very limited resolutions. And what I mean by that is you've got 4K 30, you got 2.7K at 30, you got 1080p at 60, and then you got 1080p at 30, and then 720. On the Akaso Brave 7 LE, you've got 1080 120 frames per second, or even 2.7K at 60 frames per second. Now let's talk about the 1080p footage that comes out of the Campark. The 1080p footage is rough. It looks like a very, very low bit rate 720, or even just a standard definition, because it's like it's over sharpened and the quality is just not there. It is not a 1080 signal or 1080 resolution quality at all. Because if it is 1080, I'm very shocked because it looks horrific. Now, speaking of sharpness, one thing I will say, the Campark, and there is no sharpness setting in either of these cameras where you can go into the menu system and add sharpening, high, medium, or low. The Campark is very sharp. Sharp to a point to where it's artificially sharp. Where if you're filming someone's face, you'll actually see blocks and blotches like somebody's had bad acne when they were young. And that's something to kind of keep in mind. So those are my overall impressions and my final thoughts about the Campark V40. Is it a good supplemental camera? Well, if you're looking at, hypothetically, let's say the V40 and the Akaso Brave 7 LE are at the same price, I would personally choose the Akaso Brave 7 LE over the Campark, just because I think its image quality looks better, because the Campark is very contrasty. It is very, very dark in the shadows. The field of view is a lot tighter on the Campark than it is on the Akaso Brave 7 LE, so that's another con to think about. But if you're not an Akaso fan, and there may be some people out there that they just don't like Akaso, they'd rather choose Campark, and that's fine. You know, the Campark V30 and the Akaso V50X are also identical. Now, they look a little bit different on the outside. Their inside internals and all the specs, they're identical cameras. But the Campark V30 will have an audio sync problem. It goes out of sync much quicker than what the Akaso does. So, you know, it's not a bash against Campark. And I wish that these companies could, you know, Akaso could make the Brave 7 LE a perfect camera, or at least improve it a lot just by fixing whatever's going on with the audio with Akaso. And in my personal opinion, what I'm about to talk about, this next subject regarding budget cameras, will kind of touch on why I think Akaso has not improved the audio on the Brave 7 LE or on the Brave 6 Plus or on the V50X. All in all, I mean, is the Campark V40, is it worth it? You know, when it's an identical camera to the Akaso Brave 7 LE, my vote personally goes to the Akaso Brave 7 LE. I think that it offers you more for your money if both are priced at the same price point, which they have been at $139.99. So that's my final thoughts on the Campark V40. Now I want to talk about action cameras and these budget action cameras. And I made a Twitter post, I guess it was last week, talking about the Campark V40, and wow, it's identical to the Akaso Brave 7 LE. And what's going on with all the copycatting? Well, I don't think that it's copycatting. And a lot of people will talk about, well, you know, and by the way, if you're Chinese or you're from China, there's no offense. But a lot of people will say that, well, a lot of these Chinese companies, they will copy each other. So if one makes the DJI Osmo Pocket, then you'll have another company that kind of copies it, and then they make their version of it. That's one form of copying. The copying that I'm going to talk about right now, which I don't think a lot of people realize, is that there is one manufacturer that makes all of these new style action cameras, and then they rebrand them. They sell them to different companies. And what I mean by that is, if you go to Alibaba.com and you type in dual screen action camera, you might be surprised to find these cameras, but not with the Akaso label, not with the Campark label. If you purchase at least 1,000 units, then you can get custom packaging. So let's say I want to make a worth it or not action camera. By the way, if anybody wants to back me on that, and I'll pick out a really good camera, and then we can bring a camera to market, even though somebody else has already made it and we're just rebranding it. But if, let's say, worth it or not action camera, I can get worth it or not packaging done. I can get worth it or not printed on the outside of the camera, and I can tell them what I want for firmware, and they'll tell me pricing for the firmware. And I think that's why you see so many people go, wow, well, in the first one, when we talk about the Akaso V50 Pro, there were a few people out there that noticed that, wow, the Akaso V50 Pro looks real familiar in its button layout and everything. And that's true, because there was a company called MG Cool that came out with the Explorer 3. And I don't believe MG Cool is around anymore, but I believe that they purchased it from Alibaba, or an Alibaba type company, and had it branded MG Cool Explorer Pro 3. And then Akaso did the same thing. They said, hey, we like that. We want at the Akaso V50 Pro. And from the V50 Pro, then we've got the DB Power. Identical cameras, different firmwares. So now I'll bring up the part about firmware that I was talking about earlier. And I think that this is why it's very important that to realize maybe this is why Akaso has not been offering firmware updates to address the audio issue. Because trust me, Akaso is very well aware, between myself and many hundreds of other people that have reached out to them to talk to them about their audio situation with the V50X, with the Brave 6 Plus, and now the Brave 7 LE. Its audio signal is so quiet and it's very tinny. And now seeing that the Campark can have a nice full range audio nice strong signal, not over clipped, but a nice strong signal. That tells me that if it's the same internals, it is a firmware issue, that they can tweak the firmware on it. And maybe the reason why Akaso hasn't tweaked the firmware is because they don't want to pay any extra money to, whether it's Alibaba or the company that Alibaba uses to create these cameras. And I'm sure that there's software engineers that write the code for the firmware on these action cameras. And so that's just a little heads up about why you may be seeing a lot of budget action cameras that are identical, the way that they look to one another, although the features may be a little bit different. And I think the difference in the features comes straight down to cost of what you're willing to pay for firmware. I wish Akaso had paid that extra buck or two and maybe gotten rid of 2.7K 60 and added better audio to the Brave 7 LE. But that's just a little bit of food for thought. You know, the Campark V40, I had high hopes for it. I was really impressed when I first listened. I just did an audio test. I was here in the room, quick little audio test, stuck it in the computer, and I was like, whoa, nice clean audio signal. This is a promising camera. And the lens looks a lot different between these two. If I can get my... So you can see the lens is a little bit different between these two. But I like the wider field of view on the Akaso Brave 7 LE. I don't like that tight field of view, and I think that's why the Campark is a little bit better in stabilization when you're walking nice and smooth. But if you're doing any panning motions, as soon as you do a pan or a tilt up, the image is very jerky and the low light is terrible on it. So that's my 2 cents for today. I just thought I'd kind of get you up to speed on why some of these budget action cameras out there are so identical to one another. And if there's somebody out there that says, hey, I want to start up an Amazon store and I want to brand my own action camera, you can go to Alibaba. I mean, you know, you've got the price anywhere from, let's see here, on this particular model, it's $65.69 for 2 pieces to 499 pieces. Or you can get it down to $60 if you buy 5,000 pieces or more. And if minimum order, custom logo, custom packaging, minimum order is 1,000 pieces, you can basically come up with your own action camera and tell them this is what you want, because actually these cameras are offered in 4K 60 too. Which I'm very surprised about, because the chipset is not capable of doing 4K 60. It's only capable of doing 4K 30. So that makes me kind of wonder if it's going to be a lot of the frame doubling. It looks like 60 frames per second, but when you look at it, it's actually double frames. So I'm going to end this video. It's been very long, and didn't mean for it to be this long, by the way. But I just want to give you my final thoughts on the Campark V40. And also the budget action camera market and why it is the way that it is. It's not so much copycat as it is they're buying from one supplier and having everything rebranded. So I hope you guys have yourself a great day. And remember, if you're wanting to look for some different action cameras, I'll put a little playlist right up here so that you can check it out for yourself and see if there's a camera in there that you really like, or if you have a question, comment down below. Until then, I'll talk to you all later. Bye-bye.